We are continuing our study in the book of Genesis, chapter 19, dealing with Lot and the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. This will be the last episode of Genesis, chapter 19, and we'll bring in some conclusions here before we move on to Genesis, chapter 20. Let's just start with reading from Genesis, chapter 19, verse 1, and we will continue from where we last left off, which I believe is verse 30 of Genesis, chapter 19. And there came two angels to Sodom at even, and Lot sat in the gate of Sodom. And Lot, seeing them, rose up to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face toward the ground. And he said, Behold now, my lords, turn in, I pray you, into your servant's house, and tarry all night, and wash your feet. And ye shall rise up early, and go on your ways. And they said, Nay, but we will abide in the street. And he pressed upon them greatly, and they turned in unto him, and he entered into his house, and he made them a feast. And they did bake unleavened bread, and they did eat. But before they lay down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the house round, both small and young, and all the people from every quarter. And they called unto Lot, and said unto him, Where are the men which came into thee this night? Bring them out unto us, that we may know them. And Lot went out at the door unto them, and shut the door after him, and said, I pray you, brethren, do not so wickedly. I just want to pause here and comment on verse 3 of Genesis chapter 19. Someone had asked me previously, why did they have this feast? And I didn't really give an adequate answer, but just with continuing studying of this and reflecting on it, I think part of this feast is a fellowship that of encouragement, strengthening them, both for their journey. Right. I think this is partly done, and it has spiritual applications to the church before we actually are taken from this world through rapture, right, or being caught up. That during the nighttime or during the time of the darkness, or we discussed that this occurred at evening, that the strength that they were going to need to make it through the night, and then to make it through out the city, and then to make it where they were supposed to go to the mountain, that this feast and this fellowship were all part of their being strengthened and encouragement and a celebration of their deliverance that was to come, but also preparing them for the journey. Because, remember, they were taken out of this, brought out without the city, and then they were told to go to the mountains, right? And it was going to be a very arduous task. It's so much that Lot's like, there's no way that I could do it. But he actually already had been strengthened by this feast for this journey. All right. But anyway, carrying on here, verse 8. It says, Behold, now I have two daughters which have not known man. Let me, I pray you, bring them out unto you, and ye do to them as good in your eyes. Only unto these men do nothing. And they said, Stand back. And they said again, This one fellow came into sojourn, and he will needs be a judge. Now we will deal worse with thee than with them. And they pressed sore upon the man, even Lot, and came near to break the door. But the men put forth their hand and pulled Lot into his house to them, and shut to the door. And they smote the men that were at the door of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they wearied themselves to find the door. And the men said unto Lot, hast thou here any besides son-in-law, thy sons, thy daughters, and whatsoever thou hast in the city, bring them out of this place. For we will destroy this place, because the cry of them is waxen great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it. And Lot went out and spake unto his sons-in-law, which married his daughters, and said, Up, get you out of this place, for the Lord will destroy the city. But he seems as one that mocked unto his sons-in-law. And when the morning arose, then the angels hastened Lot, saying, Arise, take thy wife and thy two daughters, which are here, lest thou be consumed in the iniquity of the city. While he lingered, the men laid hold upon his hand, and upon the hand of his wife, and upon the hand of his two daughters, the Lord being merciful unto him, and they brought him forth and set him without the city. And it came to pass, when they had brought them forth abroad, that he said, escape for thy life, look not behind thee, neither stay thou in all the plain. Escape to the mountain, lest thou be consumed. And Lot said unto them, Oh, not so, my Lord. Now behold, thy servant has found grace in thy sight, and thou hast magnified thy mercy, which thou hast shewed unto me in saving my life. And I cannot escape to the mountain, lest some evil take me and I die. Behold, now this city is near to flee unto, and it is a little one. Oh, let me escape thither. Is it not a little one? And my soul shall live. And he said unto him, See, I have accepted thee concerning this thing also, that I will not overthrow this city for which thou hast spoken. Haste thee, escape thither, for I cannot do anything till thou be come thither. Therefore, the name of the city was called Zoar. The sun was risen upon the earth when Lot entered into Zoar. Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities and all the plain and all the inhabitants of the cities and that which grew upon the ground. But his wife looked back from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. And Abraham got up early in the morning to the place where he stood before the Lord. And he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah, and toward all the plain, to all the land of the plain, and beheld, and lo, the smoke of the country went up as the smoke of a furnace. And it came to pass, when God destroyed the cities of the plain, that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in the which Lot dwelt. And Lot went up out of Zoar and dwelt in the mountain, and his two daughters with him, for he feared to dwell in Zoar, and he dwelt in a cave, he and his two daughters. So this is where we concluded at the last Bible study. We looked at some spiritual insights here. And we'll see here that there, when you look at this account here, there's two parallels. This story is written in two parallels, and I haven't quite yet figured out why there's a parallel. I think it may be showing us two different things that are going on here. One is what the world is going to be like, we know, in the last days, and there's something going to be going on. And then there's another action that's going on, and they're simultaneously blurred in together. So the format that we see here, the two parallel formats going on here, the men enter the city, right? Well, they're talking about there's men, which is men of Sodom. These men of Sodom, and they come and they question. They put a question toward Lot. Of course, they're questioning Lot about angels. Then the next thing is that these men, that after they question Lot, they say, bring out, like bring them out, right? And then we see that Lot, he goes out. And what does Lot try to do? He closes the door behind him, and he tries to convince the men, right? And then these men press and urge him. And their pressing and urging is to try to harm and destroy. And then we see in the story, Lot gets rescued by hand and pulled back into the house. Now, this outline here is a repeating outline that we see that the men of angels, the men that are angels, do, right? So the men, or the angels, they come and they question Lot. This is like the latter part, the second half of the story here that we're looking at in Genesis chapter 19. The men, they question Sodom. I mean, the men, they question Lot about the men of Sodom question Lot about the angels that came in. And then here we see in the latter part of this account here, the men, they question Lot also. But when they question Lot about his relatives. Remember, we read it and it said, do you have any sons-in-laws? Do you have any daughters? Do you have any other relatives that are in this city? Right? And then Lot said, oh, yes, I do. And then the next thing is that the men tell Lot, bring them out. Bring them out, right? Bring them out with us. You know, we want to bring them out, right? And they tell Lot to bring them out. So then Lot, he goes, of course, he talks to his sons-in-laws, and they say, no, we don't want to go, right? And then the next thing happens is that Lot does go out. The angels tell him, go bring them out. And then, of course, Lot, he does go out. We see the same parallel at the first part of this chapter, The men of Sodom question Lot about these men that are there, and then the men question Lot and tell him bring those men out, and then Lot he goes out, right? He steps out, and then he tries to do a convincing. We see the same parallel here as well. Lot, he's told to bring them out, then he goes outside again. He goes to find his sons-in-law. He tries to do a convincing as well. But everything that we're seeing here is a complete opposite, a parallel of what's going on. When Lot goes out he tries to convince the men don't do something wickedly. When Lot goes out to tell his sons-in-law, he says, "Come, something wicked's about to happen. I don't want you to be caught." Right? He tries to convince them. He's unsuccessful. He's unsuccessful on both occasions. He's unsuccessful, almost throughout this, except that the angels are the one that eventually ends up saving them in all of these issues here, right? But Lot, he faces two accounts here. One is like in the natural, but it's about destruction and harming. And then one is the same account, but it's spiritual, but it's about saving lives and delivering. Right. So he goes, the second part of here, Lot goes, he tries to convince his sons-in-law. They are not convinced. Right. And he presses on them as well. He urges them as well. Right. He gets pressed and urged and no. And then, of course, what happens again? The angels have to rescue Lot by hand again. So the angels rescue Lot by hand in the first part of the story concerning the men of Sodom, and the angels, the men here as angels, rescue Lot again by hand at the latter part of the story here. Now, I'm not really sure why we have these two parallels like this. I think it's trying to show us something natural, show us something spiritual, but I haven't yet put it together, so I'm still working on it. But I know it has to do with the two parallels of what's going to be going on in the last days, right? There's two things that are going to be going on. I haven't quite put this together yet, but it's related to the end times. And when I finally finish getting these two parallels here together, I'll explain it to you better, and it'll be with some spiritual revelation that is of importance to us to understand in these last days of these two things that are going on, that we see going on here with Lot. These two warfares kind of going on here, something like that. I don't know. I'm not really saying it right yet, but there's something more to this. All right, so continuing on in Genesis chapter 19, beginning with the second part here, they've escaped from Sodom, gone into Zoar, which was called Bela before. The city was too wicked. They feared that God would destroy them in that city as well. They escaped to the mountains, right? The only ones that escape is Lot and his two daughters. And this is where we continue the account. And the firstborn said to the younger, Genesis chapter 19, verse 31, "Our father is old, and there is not a man in the earth to come in unto us after the manner of all the earth." So these these daughters are concerned that these daughters, it is kind of understood, at least when I was studying this, that these two daughters that Lot had in his home, they were the daughters that were betrothed, and those were the son-in-laws that Lot went to go talk to get them to come out. Right. So these daughters were just betrothed. And that's the account when you're studying this. They say that's what was going on. Although he's calling them sons-in-law, they were saying that these daughters, because they said the daughters were not yet married. Otherwise, it would mean that Lot had four daughters. But it is believed that these two daughters that were staying with Lot, those daughters were betrothed to be married, and Lot went to go talk to his sons-in-laws that were betrothed to these daughters. They ended up saying no, they did not want to go, and they ended up being destroyed there. So these daughters here, are now saying, well, we don't have a man. There's not a man in the earth to come into us, to marry us, that we may have children, and our father is old. And so we're going to see here that father is used about 9 times in this account. So it's stressing something here, showing us something about who a father is, what a father should be, or contrasting the different types of fathers. When you read the book of Genesis, there's 2 fathers that are contrasted here. One is the example of Abraham as a father, we're going to see here, and then it's contrasting Lot as a father. And we're going to see the 2 different distinctions between the fathers here and what the father should do, what the father should represent, right? The 2 complete contrasts here, but both were considered righteous, right? Both were saved or preserved or protected. Both had a great reputation in the Bible, that is about Lot being righteous and being saved, right? But we know already that the scriptures already spoke of in Genesis, I don't know, was it chapter 18, that Lot was a man that the Lord said, I know him, that he will teach his family to do justice and judgment and things like that. Right. And now they're contrasting with another kind of father, right? A father that was not as devoted and spiritually minded and things like that, that always had God and all his ways considered God. Right. Here we see another type of father as well. And here we're talking about Lot as being an old father as well. We know Abraham was old as well. We're going to get to, when we go to the next chapter, we're going to see it's going to, Genesis chapter 24 is going to open up also with saying like Abraham was old and well stricken in age. So we're talking about this contrast of fathers here, right? Notice how the daughters here say that there is not a man in the earth. Like there's no man in the earth, right? Of course, we know that that's not true because Abraham, he had 300 soldiers or whatever that were raised in his own household that were men of valor. And we know that Abraham taught everyone that was in his family to know the Lord and to fear the Lord and to do justice and judgment, right? For them to say that there was no man in the earth, that's like, really? There's no man in the earth, right? And so here we see this continued effect of Sodom, both on Lot. We're going to see the continued, we've already seen the effect of Sodom on Lot. We're still seeing the continued effect of, we saw it on his wife as well. Of course, we know what happened where she looked back and turned into a pillar of salt. And now we're still seeing the continued effect of Sodom upon the daughters. Now we know who the daughters who Lot allowed to be married to his daughters, or the daughters to be betrothed to these sons-in-law, that they were men of character that loved Sodom and did not want to leave Sodom. And they mocked the fact that Lot came to them and told them that God was going to destroy this wicked city. They thought it was a joke, you know. So we see something about Lot and his decision making, about the choices that he permitted for his daughters. And we see the choice that the daughters permitted in them being with these men who were wicked and were destroyed with Sodom. And we're going to contrast that. We're going to see the contrast of that when we get to Genesis chapter 24, how Abraham is going to make provisions for his son Isaac's going to be born, how when Abraham is in his old age and well stricken, how Abraham is going to go and look for a wife for his son Isaac, and he's going to go back to his homeland to find a godly, God-fearing wife for his son. So we see that Lot did not make that provision like that. He allowed his daughters to be joined in union with these ungodly, wicked men, right? And so we're going to see a lot of contrast here as we continue reading this account here. Again, we see the daughters are going to make this wrong decision already. They're saying there's not a man to come into us. Right? We already know where the story is headed, right? When we see this word father, and then we see this word old, right? This word old here is trying to show us, when we look in contrast as we continue reading the book of Genesis, when it talks about Abraham being old as well. What this word old is trying to symbolize is representing the end point of a person's life, right? Age reveals the wisdom of an individual, right? Not how they begin do we judge the wisdom of an individual. The end point judges the decisions and the choices and the wisdom that a person has, right? The Bible says wisdom is justified of her children. That means that the wisdom, it takes time for wisdom to have its perfect work and to be revealed. Time is the only thing that reveals wisdom, right? Time reveals wisdom. And so when we're looking at talking about Lot is our father is old, it's also indicating that time is revealing the wisdom of Lot. And the story is going to be that he was left with absolutely nothing, dwelling in a cave, right? And his daughters, of course, making these wrong decisions as well. It's revealing a lot of the choices that he's made. The choices are not revealed how bad those decisions are until the culmination of the end point of his old age in life. So age or time reveals wisdom, right? So that's an important thing that Jesus talks about as well. Right. And so, but another symbol that what we see here is being parallel here is that when you see the word old, every time we've been looking at this word old, it is associated with a issue of not having descendants or children. when it talks about, when Sarah talks about she's old, she ties it in with, I can't have children because I'm old. When Abraham uses this word old, he's always tying it in with, I don't have an heir because I'm old and I don't have an heir. For some reason, you pick up on this theme that, again, these girls are saying the same thing as well. They're saying our father is old, right? And again, this old is tied with, there's no man to come in unto us that we may have children, right? And so again, we see this word old is always tied into the promise of a future, right? The promise of a future is tied to being old. But we see it goes, when it's looked at in the natural sense, I'm old, the promises and the blessings of God can't come to me unless I do something out of my own will. It leads to chaos, right? And so we're going to see that's what's going to happen here. We see that as Sarah and Abraham said, oh, we're old, or Sarah said, I'm old, I don't have a descendant or a child or an heir. I'm going to come up with my own solution. We see the same parallel happening again, right? So it's like this human nature that we talked about, right? Sometimes you wait, and the promises or the blessings that we think that should be come to you, right? It doesn't happen, and then there's this tendency of nature to say, "Well, I'm going to make it happen on my own. I'm going to come up with my own solution." As often is very dishonorable, and it leads to a lot of destruction or chaos, right? So we saw that happen in the life of Sarah and Abraham when Sarah brought in Hagar, right? So we're going to see the same similar choice as well, whether the daughters are like, we don't have a man to come into us that we may be married and have children. We're going to come up with our own solution as well, right? They find a solution as well, and it's dishonorable, and it's outside of the solution that God would provide, right? And in similar fashion, from Genesis chapter 16, dealing with Sarah and Abraham, we see occurring here in Genesis chapter 19, which I kind of go through it here. And Genesis chapter 16, Sarah gives this justifying speech. The Lord has withheld something from me. He's treated me unfairly. Something is wrong. And the wrong thing is that I don't have a child. I don't have an heir. And so Sarah brings Hagar in, and an intimate act occurs, and a son is born, or there's this pregnancy, right? And then there's this birth of a son. All right. And then out of the birth of this son comes of the father of two nations, right? That's the parallel we see that's happening with Genesis. The parallel of the father of two nations is Ishmael, right? One of promise, one of the flesh. And then we see the account of Isaac, which is going to bring about the nation of Israel. We're going to see this same account here paralleling in Genesis chapter 19. The daughters are giving us their opening justifying speech of what they're going to do, which is wrong, right? They're going to have a justifying speech saying, oh, our father is old. There's not a man in the earth to come into us. We don't have any children, stuff like that. So they perform an intimate act, of course, and then it leads to a pregnancy. And then it leads to a birth of two sons as well, right? So one with Abraham and Isaac, there was a birth from Sarah and there was a birth from Hagar. Here, there's a birth from both two daughters, but it's the same kind of parallel that we see going on here, right? I don't really understand all the spiritual aspects of this at this moment, what this is revealing, but probably next time we go through it, would have grown in maturity and revelation understanding to be able to bring this out more, because this is telling us something here, right? As we go deeper into this, of course. And then there are these birth of these sons, right? Each daughter has a son, and it is the birth of two nations as well, which we're going to see. It's going to be the Moabites and the Amorites, right? So this is kind of like what do you call it? A spoiler alert here, right? So we see these two parallels going on here. We see multiple parallels going on in the book of Genesis, both with Lot and the men of Sodom and the men of these angels, and the same parallel organizational structure, right? As we continue on here in Genesis chapter 19, we see in Genesis chapter 24, again, it talks about Abraham was old and well stricken in age, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. So we're showing the contrast of Lot and his old age, right? And his relationship and fellowship with the Lord, right? And how Abraham is blessed and the Lord is blessing him. And this is talking about the time when Isaac needs a son. I'm sorry, when Isaac needs a wife, and how God gives Abraham insight and wisdom on how to provide an honorable, godly spouse for Isaac, right? We see Lot doesn't provide that. He does not have that fellowship to be able to have this wisdom right? And so things go awry. So as an example of Lot as a father, he's very lacking in this sense. Whereas Abraham being well stricken and age as well, but the Lord is walking with him and he is with the Lord, and he also reaches his end point where I need my offspring needs a spouse, right? But here, and when we get to Genesis chapter 24, it talks about that Abraham is wise enough to say, "Thou shalt not take a wife unto my son of the daughters of the Canaanites." He's speaking to his Eleazar, right? His lead head servant or something like that. And I don't know what you would call it, whatever. But Abraham gives instructions to Eleazar to go into his homeland, which is Syria, and find a wife for Isaac, right? And so we see here that when in the land of Canaan, they were both faced with the same example. Lot knew this about his daughters were old, and they couldn't take someone from the land of Canaan, but it did not mean that there was no men in all the earth, because there were, you know. Abraham, he knew that. He's no, you can't take anyone in Canaan, you can't take anyone in the Jordan plain. The wisdom of God and the blessing of God gave him instruction to go out into his homeland, right? But nope, that didn't happen with Lot. So then the daughters take things into their own hands. So we see here, I just put just a quick little synopsis of some few things here. Abraham, he walked by faith, right? God would open up his eyes to see things and would reveal things to him. Whereas Lot, he walked by sight. We talked about this, the lust of the flesh, the pride of life, what we would see in the Garden of Eden, how Adam and Eve fell, right? Walking very carnally, right? Abraham was one that was very generous and very forgiving. Lot, here we see he always was looking for the worldly thing. He was very greedy, always looked at things that dealt with Egypt, that was full of wealth and looked like the Garden of Eden. So he was always very carnally minded, right? Abraham, he looked for a city that was not made by man's hand, a city that was made by God, or a city that was from above, right? Whereas Lot, he found his home in a city called Sodom, that was a city destroyed by God, that was made by man's hands. And the outcome was very perverse, such that they waxed wicked before God, and God came and had to destroy it, right? And all these are part of we see the example of the differences between Abraham and Lot, and their relationship, and their continuing in the faith of having continued fellowship with God and with the Word of God. Abraham, we're going to see, he's called the father of all who believe, right? And it says, and all the nations will be blessed because of Abraham being the father of all those believe. What happens with Lot? We're going to see here Lot is already being called a father, but the father that Lot becomes, he's going to become a father of nations that are going to be considered, that will be the mortal enemies of Israel, right? And their offspring are going to be the ones that lead Israel into a lot of destruction, and calamity comes upon the nation of Israel because of the Lot being a father that has descendants that continue on a legacy of hedonism, paganism, idolatry, and the spirit of homosexuality and all kinds of sexual perversion as well. As all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in Abraham, Lot's is remembered by, when you look in Second Peter, maybe in Book of Jude, when it talks about Lot, it talks about remember Lot's wife. So it's a warning of not to be a certain way, right? That you're not blessed. You end up being cursed. You end up being destroyed. Right? Remember that, right? That's the remembrance associated with Lot and his family or his heritage, right? Abraham, of course, becomes the heir of the world, right? Of the world to come, right? And Lot ends up not getting anything or having anything. He just ends up just being dwelling in a cave, and all his possessions are destroyed, including his wife and his children. Everything just ends up being just kind of destroyed and defiled, right? That's the account that we see when we're talking about a father here. But the girls say, come on, verse 32, Genesis chapter 19, verse 32. The girls say, come, let us make our father drunk with wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve seed of our father. Now we're going to see here that they tie in, every time we see this word father relate to the girls, they're always going to say our father, their father. It's always possessive, my father, right? Letting us know that this is something that they should not be doing, because this is their father, right? But this is something that they accepted, like this is our father or my father, and they went and did this evil deed. And that's because it was still part of the affluence of sodomy, Sodom and Gomorrah. So we said this homosexual spirit is more than just talking about lesbianism or homosexuality. The spirit of Sodom and Gomorrah, or this homosexual spirit, it includes all other kinds of perverse sexual acts, incest, and things like that. And that's all mentioned in the book. We read through it. I think we went into Deuteronomy and Numbers just before Moses was telling the nation of Israel that they were going to go into the land of Canaan. He gave them instructions not to do as the land of Canaan. He gave them a long list of things, and it started with seeing the nakedness of thy father or thy mother, but it went into all kinds of details that included homosexuality, but included lesbianism, included all kinds of incest, and all other kinds of perversion that was associated with Canaan and that whole land there, the Jordan and land of Canaan, that whole area region today, right? So the spirit that we're talking about here is not just homosexuality and lesbian here; it includes all other kinds of perversions, and so that's what we see going on here. So we see the word lie used 7 times. We see the word father used 9 times here, just indicating the relationship here that the daughters were doing. It was very perverse. But we see Sodom has not left the daughters. The daughters left Sodom, but Sodom has not left the daughters, right? But they tried to conceal their wickedness through their father's drunkenness, right? And we're going to see this is a pattern here that we see again that we've come across in Genesis chapter 19 here, that they conceal their wicked deeds, of this drunkenness is used to engage in sexual perversions like homosexuality and lesbianism, right? And I'll tell you, when I was in college, I probably shared this with my wife, when I was in college, I would always see these, what do you call these people that kind of like, uh, predators, right? When I was in college, I would see these homosexual and lesbian predators, or any of these kind of predators, sexual predators, whatever, of the spirit of iniquity of this homosexual spirit. They would always try to get these guys drunk. I used to tell my wife that when I was in college, these predators, man, they would try to get these young guys fresh coming in their first year, coming in to college, and bang, get them drunk. And then the stories I would hear, I'd be like, oh man, bro, I'm so sorry, bro, how that happened to you, whatever. But we're going to see this. This is a very common theme here. So when you go back to a similar account in Genesis chapter 9, we see a similar parallel here. Right, we see in Genesis chapter 9 is dealing with the account of Noah. There's the land was very wicked, that God said I have to destroy the whole world by flood. So he does that. A judgment of a flood comes. Noah survives that, right? Then we know what happens. The Bible says Noah became a husbandman. He began to have a vineyard. And then he ended up getting drunk. And then what happens? Ham comes in unto him, and use the phrase, he sees the nakedness of his father. So we know that we discussed that actually talking about a homosexual act. And that's why it's always says when it refers to Canaan, it says he is the father of Canaan. Ham was the father of Canaan, tying those two deeds and acts together, right? We see a similar occurrence here. There's another judgment that comes upon Sodom, but a judgment comes, and it's fire and brimstone. Lot survives it, just like Noah, right? Because he's righteous. Then wine comes in, right? Wine is used, and there's some spiritual symbolism here about drunkenness allows the opportunity for perversion to take place, or some kind of defilement, or some kind of wicked. There's this theme of drunkenness that takes place, and it's both speaking both natural, but it's also speaking in spiritual sense. Because when you look at the book of Revelation, it talks about a lot about drunkenness, drunken with the wine of Babylon, it's like drunkenness is used for the promotion or the concealment or the act of perversion. So that's what happened. These daughters, they use this wine to lie with their father to perform this sodomy, this homosexual act, or this sexual perverse spirit. Right? They use this wine again, same as what we saw in Genesis chapter 9 with Noah, wine, and Ham, and the act, right? And so again, and then out of that, right, comes this curse, right? When Ham does that, Ham gets titled a father, but he becomes the father of Canaan, which is a very a negative sign, that this title. right? And Lot becomes, as we're going to see, becomes the father of Moab and the Ammonites. And what we're going to find out as you continue reading the book of Genesis and Exodus, right? That's not a title that you want. My wife is asking the question, why would God save Lot, but then his offspring, there is no real offspring, at least a righteous offspring, um, and then right. And then out of that, Lot becomes a father of, of 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 two nations that basically Israel has to kill them off, or they just become enemies of Israel. It's like, why would God allow all that to happen? But this is part of, I can't really answer that question. I can only just reveal it. But like I'm saying, there's a lot to this that I'm still learning. And I hope the next time we go through, or when I do come across it and get better understanding, we'll go back through this and I can go more in depth and show you the spiritual thing. Because there are some very deep spiritual things here that the Word of God is trying to reveal to even to those that are righteous, right? That there's two examples here of fathers, both called righteous, but both had different outcomes. The different outcomes were based on the decisions that they made in their lives, right? And even us as believers, some are, we said, weak and some are strong, and we may not be two people living in two different homes, right? Hearing the same word, believing the same God, right? Fellowshipping with in the same communion fellowship, have two different outcomes. One is extremely blessed; their children are blessed, become a great nation that's a blessing, and another family, right, who knows God as well, were delivered from, deliverance is talking about when you go from cross the Euphrates rivers, how God says, how I delivered you and stuff like that, and brought you into the land of Canaan and stuff like that. Lot was delivered and brought into the land of Canaan, but he went back, right? He went back, didn't continue to go all the way. His very carnal minded, as Apostle Paul would say, right? And that leads to death. There's a story here that is told, and we see that a lot. We see two families. We see a husband or a wife, right, who they themselves love the Lord, but when you look at their offspring, you look at their heritage, right, it tells a story that is like something's wrong there, right? And what's revealed to us is that there are additional choices that have been made or not made that has caused their um, loss, has caused great loss, and we see it in their children and their children's children, right? And it's not supposed to be that way, right? And that we have an idea of why is that way. There's been some choice and decisions that have been made that have been very disastrous, that has caused their children and their children's children to, become murderers, or I don't know, mentally ill, or whatever it is, just all kinds of things. Just thinking of, just become what do you call them, reprobates or apostates, and you're like, well, how can that happen, right? We see an example here of things that can happen, right? And the choices that you make is very serious here, and these things are very real. We see it still happening today in this world today, right? But continuing on, just look at my notes here. I have Noah, of course, his sons was Japheth and Shem that go and cover him, right? But here, what the two daughters do, they do the complete opposite. They take their father, and while he's drinking with wine, and they actually uncover their father. So we see, we see parallels in many levels, but we see them being reversed in many levels. When it comes to Lot, the opposite things are happening unto Lot, you know, and the opposite things are happening, Verse 33 going on here, it says, and they made their father drink wine that night. So speaking of the daughter, so both of them worked together to get their father drunk. It wasn't just one daughter went in to get her father drunk. Both of them worked together to get their father drunk, right? Drunk with wine that night. And then the firstborn went in and lay with her father, and he perceived not when she lay down nor when she arose. Now, again, there's another parallel. I'm not trying to make this a bunch of parallels here, but there's just so many parallels that we see here. Now, when Noah was drunken with wine, he was still alert enough spiritually. He was still alert spiritually to know that something had been done wrong with him, and he was able to curse Canaan, right? and cursed his son Canaan. And we talked about the effect that Sodom has on your spiritual state, how it makes you, how you causes you to linger, how it causes you to slack, how it causes you, it has a draw and pull on you, it has an oppression upon you, it keeps you in bondage. We see here that no, that Lot here is a continuing affluence of Sodom still in Lot and still have an effect on him, that he is not, was not even alert, aware enough, or spiritually minded enough to know that he had been made drunk, and the daughter, one daughter came in unto him and lied with him and was intimate with him. And when he arose, he had no idea what had happened. None. And then it happened again the next night. He was drunk again. The two daughters got together and made him drunk again. Well, I'm going ahead here, right? And he did not know what happened again the next night, right? So we see here that the effect of being around and in and being bonded with and not separating yourself or being attracted to Sodom and Gomorrah and its wealth and its riches, how it weakens you, how, so much to the point that we know that Lot had to be grabbed by two angels and taken without because by the mercies of God, right? But that all had to happen because of just, him not separating himself out. And we know in the last days, the scriptures, the prophecies that you read, the book of Revelation, it talks about, or no, maybe it's some of the Old Testament prophecy. It talks about scriptures saying, "Come out of her, my people. Come out of Babylon." Right? Make yourself ready for the bride. Right? That's what the scriptures are prophesying, even in the Old Testament, saying, "Come out, come out, come out." Why? You may end up. If you don't, there's going to be some loss related to you associated with what happens to Lot, right? And so but we see here an example of Noah. He was aware of something had happened, right? Lot, boom, was not, and then it happened twice, right? And it's like, oh man, Lot, oh my goodness, bro, you are really, the effect of Sodom is still with him, right? Still have an effect on him. But verse 34, it says, "And it came to pass on the morrow that the firstborn said unto the younger, Behold, I lay yesternight with my father." See how they always talk about my father, just kind of just really just saying that how they knew what they were doing, that they should not, and it was their father, and they were still doing that. So let us make him drunk with let us make him drink wine. So they were like forcing themselves upon him, like, we're gonna make him drink wine, right? Uh, that's that same spirit that we saw with in Sodom and Gomorrah. Like, we're gonna make him. We're going to, you know, we're gonna push ourselves upon. We're gonna defile ourselves with our Father, right? Then let's just make him drink wine this night also, and then thou and go thou in and lie with him, that we may preserve the seed of our Father, right? So there's nothing more that can be said about this. Um, as my wife is probably saying, I shouldn't go too deep into all this as well. This is a family Bible study that we have going on here, right? Oh, I went the wrong way. Um, Right, verse 35 says, "And they made their father drink wine that night also, and the younger arose and lay with him and perceived not when she lay down, nor when she arose." So here we see again, he had no idea, right, when she laid down, nor when she arose, right? In contrast to an example that we see here, same example here of Lot. And we with Noah, and the same outcome, that what Noah was exposed to by him is the same spirit, sexual perversion, of what we see in the daughters doing here, the same way, the same example is showing us if that same spirit is still at work. And what it's trying to also show us that their judgment came, and then right after the judgment, the same spirit that had been destroyed by God, right, is still trying to bring itself out again and resurface and replant itself, and is trying to operate and destroy against the people of God, right? That's what we see, the pattern that we see with Noah, that judgment came, Lot escaped out of, Noah escaped out of it, and then right afterward, right, new earth, the new blessings, we see this spirit again trying to attack the righteous Noah, take advantage of him, pervert him, and bring about a perverse nation that will be the enemies of the people of God. Again, we see that judgment came. God, he poured his judgment against Satan, against wickedness. Righteous Lot escaped, and then righteous Lot again is attacked by that same spirit to try to destroy him and destroy his seed and destroy his family and completely turned everything around to the opposite way that God had designed it to be, right? And so very, very dangerous thing here that we have to recognize that the spirit of this world is trying to intently, right, destroy the righteous, trying to intently pervert the righteous, and trying to make us drunk, trying to take advantage of, trying to, like it's that is waiting on that, it's trying to trap, entrap. I'm trying to think of certain words. It's on a prowl. It's predatory. It's I don't know. I'm trying to think of the word, but Satan is trying to get the righteous. Okay, if you escape the perversion, right, he's still going to try to bring it back to you some kind of way, or affect your children. You know, stuff. He's going to try to do that, right? And that's what we see here. It goes on here. It says, verse 36, thus were both the daughters of Lot with child by their father. Again, the always talking about father and being there. The daughters of Lot with child by their father. And the firstborn bare a son and called his name Moab. The same is the father of the Moabites unto this day. Now, if you go back, many of you know the account of the people of Moab. The people of Moab, it comes in with this prophet, which I can't think of the name, but he was a prophet that another nation, maybe it was the Amorites or something like that. Another nation was trying to bring down the nation of Israel, and they called this prophet, who was a prophet that it was a real prophet. And these people called this prophet to try to figure out how they could bring Israel down. And this prophet counseled the nation of Moab and told him, what is this prophet's name? I think a donkey talked to him and told him, like, Balaam, yes, prophet Balaam, yes, thank you, wife. The prophet Balaam told them, like, send the women of Moab into the children of Israel and have them marry them and lie with them and defile them and cause them to serve other gods. So we see the same kind of nature of the women being the one to go in to try to defile the righteous people, right? And so we see this theme over and over and over again about how this homosexual spirit or sexual perversion is used to try to draw the people of God away, the righteous people of God, to bring about their destruction when they have escaped the destruction, because God is blessing them, bringing a blessing upon them. And that was one of the things that was said. It was like, you can't curse these people of God. These people of God, they serve God, and they're righteous for God, and God is blessed them. There's nothing you can do against them unless they don't serve their God. And the question is, well, how do we get them not to serve their God so they can be cursed by God? And then the prophet Balaam tells the Moabites, send your women into them and then have them lay with them and then be defiled and then serve other gods, and then God will curse them, right? So we see that the Moabites are people of sexual immorality, right? And that's how Satan uses them to destroy the people of God, or the enemies of Israel. Right. And they constantly, when you read the account of the Moabites, they're always standing in the way, always opposing the nation of Israel, always opposing the Israelites and fighting and always oppressing them, right? And so the spirit of lesbianism, homosexuality, or this the spirit of iniquity, of the sexual perversion, it is there to try to stand in the way, to try to oppose the people of God, to try to oppress the people of God, to draw them away so that they can also suffer the destruction and the wrath of God. So we always have to be very mindful of the spirit of this world. Its purpose is coming intentionally. I mean, it's already captured the world, we know that, but its desire is to capture the righteous people. The world that don't know God and in idolatry, they're going to be destroyed. So Satan is happy with that. But his goal is, I've got to get the people of God also. When they've already escaped, my goal is to trap them back in. I think I saw somebody with a chat here. Let's see here. Scripture says, who is Moab today? Moab today is still the same people in the region of Jordan today. So the Moabites are actually what we would call Jordan today. That's still their heritage and their people today. Lot is he birthed the nation of Jordan. So when we were in Jordan most recently, they had signs about Lots, and Lot. You can actually go where Lot is in this cave, right? They call him the prophet Lot. But the cave that Lot dwelled in with his daughters, they actually have that preserved. We didn't get an opportunity to go see that, but I don't know. We get go to Israel one day. If you guys want to and have time, we can cross over and we can go and visit the Jordan, where places where Jesus was baptized, where Lot dwelt in the cave. We can go to the place where Sodom and Gomorrah was, stuff like that. We can go and see all these things, and You can go see the Dead Sea, which is called the Salt Sea in Genesis earlier, and a couple chapters ago. You can go see all these things today, and you will see this history, how you'll see Lot there. And we'll be talking about Lot. Lot is the father of the nation of Jordan from the Moabs and the Amorites, right? And so they still exist here today. And that's why you see a lot of homosexuality and stuff like that, although it's unspoken, but it's considered actually normal in the Arab nations and countries like that. It's quite common to them. To us, we're like, oh, but to them, homosexuality is more acceptable than heterosexual fornication with, between a man and a woman. That's considered a no-no, but homosexuality is acceptable, right? That's an acceptable thing. It's completely backwards, though, but yes. All right. Hope I answered that question. Verse 38 says, and the younger, she also bare a son and called his name Benami. The same is the father of the children of Ammon until this day. Now, Ammon is a real city today. We flew into the airport called Ammon. I can't think of the first. Amman, yes, Amman, yes, Amman. And we stayed we went to the capital, Amman, right? I think we were in the capital, Amman, when we flew in to go to Petra. We had dinner out on the street and stuff like that. Oh, it was a wonderful time. Great food, stuff like that. But yeah, so it's really great when you go back to these places and you're in Amman, the birthplace of the nation of Lot and stuff like that, and the people, the heritage of Lot, stuff like that. But the Ammonites also had all kind of sexual perversion as well. They were again a prominent enemy of Israel, long Israel enemy of Israel, and they perform all kind of forms of idolatry, even child sacrifice, human sacrifice, and child sacrifice. Of course, the Moabites did as well. All of them, all and then we went to Petra, and in Petra you can see they had animal sacrifices, they had human sacrifices, they had child sacrifice, stuff like that. Just kind of terrible. And if you were to go to Petra and go to the mont to there, have these temples there, you'll see all that stuff there, and you'll get a better idea. And they actually had this stuff carved in, and and sacrifice altars, stuff like that. You're like, man, this stuff, it really is real. They did do all this stuff there. But again, the story of time is about running out here. The story of Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah that we're talking about here, I keep saying there's great spiritual insight that relates to the last days for the church that I have not yet kind of put it together yet, but it will come because it's important for us to be able to preach this and to teach this to make up the church. But because the Apostle Paul talks about it as a sign of the last days in 2 Peter chapter 2, we kind of touched on it a little bit, right? Jesus talked about it in Luke chapter 17, verse 29 through 30. He says, in the last days when the Son of Man is revealed at the end of the great tribulation, he compares it to being like Sodom and Gomorrah, as well. He compares it, right? So there's some things there that the church, that Jesus is warning us about and showing us, right? Both for the elect of the Jews, right, in the end time, but also for the elect of the body of Christ, for the elect that are the body of Christ. He referenced this for us. Peter referenced that there's things in that we need to study and be quite aware of, and we're a little slack on it, and sleeping on these things when we should not. Um, but we see here that there's a generation, a nation arising out of Lot versus Abraham. We see the parallel here already here, right? And you would think a man that was righteous, but a lot of his seed and everything that happened out from that happened because he was not diligent and keeping and teaching his family justice and judgment and commanding his children to know the Lord and to walk in his ways and instilling it and being an example, right? We talked about Abraham when the Lord talked about Abraham, that he just not just taught them or but commanded them. He also says that he will show them the way, right? So he was an example that demonstrated them Christ or the way of God, the word of God, right? You have to be that fullness of that example. And that was instilled in Abraham's family and his surroundings. He always built these altars and enthroned Christ everywhere, enthroned God everywhere. Always had fellowship with God, right? Versus what we see what Lot did that was not spoken by him. So Lot's heritage and his family completely ruined. That's the consequences of his choices. And speaking of him as a father in his old age is showing him that, yes, the choices that you make, right, the wisdom of it is revealed, and sometimes those choices lead to ruin and loss and lots of poor consequences that happen with that. All right, I'm trying to wrap this up. Um, we see in Zephaniah chapter 2. I'm just going to end with this right here. I think. Yes. Zephaniah talks about the nation of Moab and ties it with Sodom. It says, "Therefore, as I live, saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, surely Moab command." I'm just talking about how bad Moab was. Surely Moab shall be as Sodom. So again, the spirit that these daughters had, although it wasn't homosexuality and lesbianism, it was incest, right? That's all still part of what we call sodomy, or the spirit of Sodom and Gomorrah. That's all part of it. It's all forms of kind of perverse sexual perversion. Even when you talk about sex changes and transvestites and all these kind of different things, that's all of it and all its variations. It's all tied into all of this bestiality. All of that is part of what we call the spirit of Sodom and Gomorrah, or the spirit of iniquity in the last days. So when it says, surely Moab shall be as Sodom. So they're tying these things together, what these girls did, right? And it says, and the children of Ammon as Gomorrah. So Sodom and Gomorrah, like these daughters that birthed these nations, they had this same spirit in them, right? So although that they left Lot and those daughters left Sodom and Gomorrah, it was still in them, right? Those girls still had that spirit in them. That's where it's tying it together. And it says that even as the breeding of needles and salt pits and perpetual desolation, the residue of my people shall spoil them, and the remnant of my people shall possess them. What this verse is trying to say here, I'm kind of rushing, so I'm not really being very clear. Right. The result of the effect of Sodom and Gomorrah, and as well the same spirit that the daughters had that birthed the nation of Moab and birthed the nation of Ammon, their lifestyle and their result brings a curse and a destruction around them, that the lands that they live in is like, I think she's calling it, it's like a breeding of nettles and salt pits and perpetual desolation. The breeding of nettles is a phrase that means that that when land is so desolate because God has cursed it, or their lifestyle is so bad they just destroy everything, that nothing can grow there except undesirable plants. And those undesirable plants are plants that can only grow in harsh conditions, or places of abandon and neglect and desolation in the aftermath of God's divine judgment. So what it's saying is that the children, those two daughters, they still had a judgment upon them. Right? They still had Sodom was still in them, and they're still living out Sodom. And that judgment is still being carried out in their children, in the nation that they birth. A judgment that's going to cause them to, God's divine judgment, to continue to possess them and to come upon them. And everything that they do, everywhere that they live, it's just going to be like living in a place of abandonment. It's going to be harsh conditions. There's not going to be any life that's going to come out of it. And that's a prophecy, that all of those who associate themselves with it, with the same spirit of Sodom and Gomorrah, or don't separate from it, or are drawn toward it, the same kind of ruin is going to happen. And that's the ruin that we see happen in Lot's life, right? It's the ruin that we see happen in the daughter's life as well. That the prophecy that happened to Sodom and Gomorrah continues to work in their lives. It's worked in the lives of Lot. It's worked in the lives of their daughters, that they felt neglect, abandon, desolation, and continued judgment. So it's the consequence of what happens when you turn away from God's ways, and you have fellowship or connection with the spirit of, we call today, we would call it Babylon, but it's still called Sodom and Gomorrah as well. And Jesus talks about it, and the Book of Revelation talks about it as well. Verse 10 says, for this shall they have for their pride, because they have reproached and magnified themselves against the people of the Lord of hosts. So because they also have a desire, like these girls, they worked against Lot and defiled him, and they brought a reproach upon themselves because they always working against the people of God. We saw that with Ham, what he did with Noah. He worked against the righteous Noah, who God worked with and brought salvation and preserved, a people that would that would bring forth, the generation of Christ and the people of God, stuff like that, right? These people, they have a curse upon them because they magnify themselves. This spirit magnifies itself against the people of God, against the righteous. They magnify themselves, and they bring a reproach upon them as they try to destroy the people of God. And I was going to talk about the pride, what the other sins of why God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. I'll just read through it quickly. It wasn't just their homosexuality or other sexual perversion. It said also there's things that led up to them getting to that place. right? The iniquity was not just those sexual acts. There were things that led up to them getting to that. And Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 49, I'll read through it quickly, and then we're just going to end. They had pride, fullness of bread, right? And that's what Sodom, that's what Noah, I mean, sorry, that's what Lot liked about it. They had lots of stuff. They had lots of stuff to be prideful about. It was like Egypt and Eden, and it was amazing. And they had fullness of bread. I mean, oh, whatever you want, they had it. Today we'll call this, in the Revelation, we'll call this Babylon. Right, there was this abundance of idleness. Like, you didn't have to do anything or work. It's just there was so much that you can do and enjoy. You can just play and have fun, just enjoy yourself, right? Um, they were against the poor. They hated the poor, wouldn't strengthen the poor. They would oppress the poor and the needy, stuff like that. Right. They were haughty. Haughty is someone that exalts himself against God. Right. They exalt themselves. They hate God, fight against God, the word of God, the name of God. They pull it down. Right. They committed abomination. So this is in a sequence that we're seeing here. It starts with pride and fullness of bread and then abundance. It's showing us a stepping stone pattern, right? Oppressing the poor. And then they are haughty, exalting themselves against God. And then they enter into abominations. And we talked about abominations. Abominations are the ungodly acts performed in the worship of false gods or idolatry. So as you get into idolatry causes you to perform what's called abominations. And abominations are the acts that are done in the performance of a worship of gods, which includes sacrifices, human sacrifices, child sacrifices, animal sacrifices, seances, sexual sin, sodomy, incest, all of the kind of perversion, bestiality. Those are what's, when you see the word abomination, that's referring to acts associated in the performance of worship to a false god, right? And so this is, and all of this there is what, is what Sodom was about, or the process that led to Sodom getting to this place where God had to destroy them. All right, I've kind of said enough. We'll stop with this. Thank you for your patience. We will resume, Lord willing, tomorrow. We're going to enter into Genesis chapter 20. Again, we're going to see a similar parallel again of Sarah and Abraham saying, "Oh, Sarah is my sister." We've come across that account before, and then some king snatches up Sarah. Now, by this time now, Sarah is like in her she's like 85 or something like that. She's well stricken age, and she's still being like this desired woman. I'm like, man, this Sarah must be something else. But it just goes to show you that when you are in the fellowship of God, in the fellowship of the Word, in the fellowship of the communion, how God preserves. Right? Abraham was 85, whatever, when he went out to fight against the four kings. Right? He fought with the sword as well. So it just shows you the strength that you have when you have fellowship with the Lord, and things like that. But we're going to get into that and pull out some revelations from that as well. Any comments or questions?